Hello, Alan here. Probably haven't seen me for a while, but I'm back. If you want to follow me now, I'm, of course, on X. I'm still there. On Substack, I have a lot going on Substack now. So just find Alan Rule on Substack. This is going to go on Substack. Yeah. So today we're starting a series because I know we're not going to finish it. It's like a 3.5 hour video responding to an Eastern Orthodox YouTuber named Dr. David Patrick Harry. He has a channel called Church of the Eternal Logos. It's quite a big channel. It's 50 something K subscribers. So he's pretty successful on YouTube. He's Eastern Orthodox. I don't know if he's part of Jay Dyer's crew, but I don't know a lot about him. I'm not against him. I just want to respond to his video. And Dr. Harry, if you ever want to collab, I could come on your channel and talk to you about medieval history. I think there are errors in your video and a lot of half-truths. I don't think most are intentional, but anyway, why waste any more time? Let's get to the response video.
All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dr. David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos. And tonight we have a community-sponsored stream. That's right. This one is sponsored by actually you guys out there. We did a super chat goal for 50 super chats in a stream, of which you guys attained the goal. And I asked, what sponsored stream topic would you guys be interested in? And you said an Orthodox perspective on the Crusades. And so in prep for this, I was going to do it again. I've had a bunch of technical difficulties on my end with the internet and stuff like that. I was going to do it, I think a week and a half ago. I devoted hours. I watched documentaries on the first, the second, the third, and the fourth Crusades. I found a couple things to read on it, and I'm pretty excited to present it to you guys tonight because
from my watching of his stuff, I watched most of this video. I had to skip parts of it, but I don't think he's read primary sources. Like, he hasn't read the primary sources on this, because if he had, he wouldn't have said some of the stuff he did. We'll get to that, but I think he's right. He watched documentaries about it, and we'll see what he says. He's going to give the Orthodox perspective. The Orthodox are only really involved in the first four Crusades. First, second, third, and fourth. After that, like, they're not part of the fifth, not part of the sixth, seventh, eighth, or ninth. And then, of course, there are subsequent Crusades where, like, Crusade of Varna, stuff like that. But that's way down the road. That's after the Crusader states have fallen. All right, let's continue with Dr.
There's really nothing on the internet. I did find a couple like academic articles that spoke about it, but nothing for like the average person to sort of digest the Crusades from an Orthodox perspective. So that's what we're going to be getting into today.
Well, you could read the primary sources, which and he's going to show clips of a video where they give the primary sources. And I've read 4 out of the 5 books they suggest, but let's get back to this.
And here's how the stream is going to be structured. So I put together a study guide. In the study guide, it begins by showing the paradigm differences between East and West, because we're talking about the Latin West, the Catholic Church, and we're talking about the Greek East, the Orthodox Church. And mind you, the Crusades occur after the Great Schism of 1054.
They do.
Okay, so there's a lot building up into the Crusades and how it's viewed from the Orthodox perspective. So we're going to look at the worldview differences. I got a timeline of important events. And then I have the major Latin figures through basically the Fourth Crusades. Really, much of our conversation today is only focusing.
By the way, the Fourth Crusade, as you know, is my specialty. I've read every English I've read everything that's been translated into English. All the Latin chronicles. I've read Geoffroy de Villehardouin, Robert of Cléry, Gunther of Paris, and I've read the Greek chronicle, Nicetas Cognatus, and I've read the papal correspondence. That cost me a ton of money to buy. I've read everything in English essentially on it. On 1 Peter 5, I wrote a 5,000 word essay on it. So yeah, it's and both sides are at fault on the Fourth Crusade. A lot of people don't like admitting this, but the Greeks did some bad things too.
On the first 4 Crusades, because the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th, besides the 8th, they basically all occurred during the time the Latins occupied Constantinople. So it basically occurred during the 4th Crusade, if you will, at least from the Orthodox perspective. So I got an overview of all 4 Crusades. So worldview differences, timeline, overview of the Crusades, the major Latin figures, the major Orthodox figures, and I got 5 myths, 5 common myths describing the Crusades that are false from the Orthodox perspective. And so
I can't remember what they are.
I have a little bit of an opening monologue. I basically want to give you guys the full overview. And the only video out there is a Kings and Generals video that talks about the Crusades from a Byzantine perspective. And we're going to watch about.
Why don't you read Anna Komnena?
About 16 minutes of that. It's like an 18-minute video, but about 2 minutes in is when the video really starts. So I'm going to provide you guys the full overview. Like, what is the actual Orthodox sentiment regarding the Crusades and why do they feel that way? Then we're going to watch the 16-minute overview video. Okay, because it's big overview. It's the whole big picture. Then I'm going to walk you through the timeline of the Crusades from the Orthodox perspective, the major figures, and we're going to dive into specifics. So I have like a 5-hour documentary. We're going to be watching the sections that are important to us from the Orthodox perspective. Then we'll get into a little bit of the Second Crusade. I have no videos that I planned on showing you guys regarding the Third Crusades. And then the Fourth Crusade, I have a video, another great video by Kings and Generals. They're all by Kings and Generals today. They've had the best videos on the Crusades. It's just a fact.
I wouldn't say that. I'd say real Crusades history is better than that. Although, like, he's well-researched. The Kings in general have a really good presentation.
Have one on what the Catholics, the Latins, stole during the sacking of Constantinople.
Yeah, that's all in Robert.
And I would like, if you guys are interested, it may be not as, again, I don't know, as interesting for some. I think it's fascinating. But you know some of the eschatological prophecies about St. John III, Ducas Vitatis, the Marble King? Well, I wanted to show you guys a little bit of St. John Vitatis, from him taking over as the emperor of the Empire of Nicaea, outside the Byzantine, the Catholics are occupying Constantinople, and how he set the stage.
Well, keep in mind that, yeah, there were several Byzantine successor states. You have Nicaea, you have Trebizond, which is in northern Anatolia on the Black Sea. Then you have the Despotate of Epirus. And not only are they trying to get Constantinople back, each one, they're also at war with each other. Battle of Pelagonia, 1259. Anyway.
For the retaking of Constantinople. It's one of the reasons, one, he was an incredible man, but his efforts and what he was able to accomplish is one of the reasons why he's actually a saint of the Orthodox Church. And so that was the goal for today's stream. So we're not going to be getting into specific details. We will be talking about the taking of Antioch, because that is a big turning point from the Byzantine perspective.
He leaves something out here.
But I don't have anything for the Third Crusade. Generally, that's Richard the Lionheart. Really from the.
Well, the thing about the Third Crusade is that there's interaction with the Byzantines, because the Byzantine Empire and Cyprus had broken away from the Byzantine Empire under this renegade named Isaac Comnenus, who called himself the Emperor of Cyprus. He hijacks steals a couple of Richard's ships that are blown off course, and Richard has to go conquer the island of Cyprus. But if you take Frederick the First, the Holy Roman Emperor, he's going the land route, so he has to go through the Byzantine Empire, and he kind of goes to war with the Byzantines while he's there. Goes to war with the Turks as well, and then, of course, if you don't know, he drowns in Anatolia crossing a river. But anyway, so okay, we'll get back to this stuff, but
Western perspective, the only real successful crusade is the First Crusade. So, anyways, that gives you guys a little bit of an understanding of where we're going to go tonight. So, let me begin with my opening monologue here. It's not big, it's just trying to give you guys the grand picture. And then we're going to watch our general overview. And then we're going to get into specific details about the story. So, smash that like, guys. Thank you all so much for being here. Also, if you have any questions or comments as we move through today's stream, feel free to send in those through super chats, whether on Dono Chat or Streamlabs or here on YouTube, whatever you prefer. And we are trying to reach the 30 super chat goal for this evening. Okay, so here we go. Most people think they understand the Crusades, but almost everything we hear about the Crusades is coming from a Western perspective.
Yeah, but keep in mind, it's often a Western academic perspective, not a Western Catholic perspective. I mean, yeah. So
very few people, and even in preparation for today's stream, very few people articulate the Crusades from the Orthodox Christian perspective.
Well, I think there's a historian, Stephen Runciman, who kind of does that, but again, I don't read modern historians.
And so the West, and this is probably the history that most of us were brought in, they view the Crusades as a sort of heroic pilgrimage. It's Christians taking back the Holy Land. They're liberating the Christians from the evil Muslims. And then they eventually conquer and take back Jerusalem, a sort of pinnacle of European Christian pride in what they were able to accomplish against all odds.
But I mean, I have a mixed view of the Crusades. There's definitely some good on it. But I don't have a romantic view, if that's what Dr. Harry is getting at here. Oh yeah, we're going to talk about that. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. Same with the guy on Cyprus, Isaac Comnenus. Anyway, he unfortunately, Dr. Harry doesn't spend a lot of time on the Third Crusade. He probably should, because he thinks it has nothing to do with the Byzantines. It actually has a lot to do with them. All right.
From the Orthodox perspective, what the Crusades are is essentially a misalignment that leads to immense tension and then ultimately absolute betrayal. And so what do
tension existed already?
I mean? The story of the Crusade from the Orthodox perspective does not begin with Jerusalem. It does not begin with Urban II, Pope. It does not begin in Paris or anything like that. We're looking at the Crusades from the perspective of Constantinople, not Rome or Paris. And so the story begins with really considered the ultimate defeat, or one of the worst defeats in the history of the Byzantine Empire, the Battle of Manzikert.
Yeah, 1071, and I've read the primary sources on this. Michael Sellos, Michael Ateliates, Romanos IV Diogenes basically goes out. He had been campaigning there for several summers, but he finally lost to the Turks big time. They had some victories over the Turks, including a 1054 in Manzikert, where a Latin mercenary kind of did a sortie, a one-man sortie, and he threw a Molotov cocktail at a piece of Turkish siege equipment. But yeah, but yeah, 1071 is what he's talking about.
And this is on the eastern side of Anatolia. Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. Anatolia is the geographical region, the name for that region. We're not going to be referring to it as Turkey, and we're not going to be referring to it as Istanbul. The eastern edge of the then Roman Empire at the end of the 11th century, the 1000s, about, I think it's 1075, the Byzantine under Emperor Romanos has a humiliating defeat against the Seljuk Turks. And in this defeat, they lose massive amount of soldiers, and they essentially open up the interior sections of Anatolia. And so what happens is the empire becomes in a succession crisis for an emperor. They're being lambasted by the Seljuk Turks, who end up occupying and taking over aspects of Anatolia. Essentially, the Byzantine Roman Empire losing much of its territory due to the conquest of the Turks. And so we get then the rise of an important emperor of the Byzantine period.
Yeah, no, but there's a lot of stuff. There was a lot of mercenaries because Romanos the Fourth goes back to Constantinople because he makes an alliance while he's captive with the Sultan, and they make a bunch of promises, and then they go back to Constantinople, and he realizes he's been and he gets overthrown, and then it's kind of like throughout the 1070s, it's Byzantine Game of Thrones. So the Turks don't get their money, and there's a bunch of rebellions in Anatolia with there's a guy named Roussel, and a lot of this stuff. 1070s. Long story short, 1070s is where Anatolia gets conquered by the Turks, and
Alexios Komnenos.
Yeah, this is 1081. He's skipping a bit. 1081 is where Alexios Komnenos comes to power, and he would remain in power for 1118. Very good emperor, by the way. Very competent. He was a theologian himself, like all the emperors were. He fancied himself the head of the church, essentially. There's a good biography of him called the Alexiad, which is going to come up. But here, we'll continue.
Alexios the First. And what he does is, one, he rises to power due to successful battles in which he was able to attain victory.
Yeah, and he puts, I believe he put the guy before him, Hotonides or something. He put him in a monastery. And when he came to the power, I think because of the Turks on the Eastern Front and the Normans on the Western Front, they had lost so much land. He had like 300 troops left in the whole empire. Anyway.
And one of which was actually a Norman. As we'll see, there was a Norman that after the Seljuk Turks began to take over territory in Anatolia, the Byzantine Empire hires a bunch of Norman mercenaries. And these Normans, who, again, they had their own little kingdom at the bottom of Italy at this point, okay? The Normans come to the Byzantium, and though they're paid to fight for the Byzantines, once they get there, one of the princes decides to actually just cut out his own state. And so there is a period in which the Byzantines hire the Norman. This is before the First Crusade. Hire a Norman, and he, as a prince, begins to develop his own state. It's Alexios Komnenos who's then commissioned by the Byzantine emperor to put an end to this. And so what he does is he then hires the Seljuk Turks, who then are in opposition to this Norman Latin knight, prince.
Okay, I think he's talking about Roussel. In Anatolia, who is this interesting person. And
I guess he's not a knight, he's a prince, but he has a bunch of Norman knights under him. And let's face it, the Western knights were, in regards just to an individual soldier, the Western knights were superior. It's just a fact.
Yep.
That's what the West had going for them, is that the knight was a superior soldier. And so Alexios hires the Seljuks to essentially arrest the Norman prince, and that's how they're able to do away with that little kerfuffle they had in Anatolia. So this is all before the First Crusade. Now, Alexios stabilizes the Byzantine Empire, but he's lost massive amounts of territory in Anatolia at this point.
Yeah, he's pretty much
what he does is he requests Western mercenaries for the purpose of reconquering Anatolia. This is the commission that Alexios sends out to Pope Urban II.
Okay, we know this commission is true because it's present in German chronicles. But the problem is he's skipping out a whole lot because the Turks, who are hitting the Byzantines, are also hitting the Arabs and have conquered Jerusalem. And they're persecuting Christian pilgrims. And Christian pilgrims have been persecuted before in Jerusalem, but now it's getting cranked up. And um, yeah, so and we don't have any written letter from Alexius saying, "Yo, Pope, I need some mercenaries." I mean, I think he's interpreting that, although it's unclear what he was searching for. But I think he's reading too much into it. Whereas me, I'm going to be a little more agnostic on it until we get more information.
Now, the Crusades begin, again, not as the Western idea of some holy war, but as a Byzantine appeal to the West for soldiers in the defense and survival of their empire. And so now,
Maybe,
mind you,
yeah.
this is in the we're now in the 1090s. Okay, 1054 is the Great Schism. There's already immense cultural tension between the East and the West. They already have unique identities. The Latins do not view themselves as Orthodox. I mean, by the time of Charlemagne, you have the Holy Roman Empire cementing the Filioque as an oppositional doctrine against the Orthodox. All of this has already taken place. So these are not brothers in arms per se, but pragmatic Christian civilizations, the Orthodox appealing to the West to bring knights and mercenaries so that they can fight off the Muslims in Anatolia. This is totally transformed in the West. Pope Urban II calls what's called the Council of Clermont.
Yeah,
and in it, he establishes a new understanding of a holy war, just war theory, but with penitence offered to soldiers who go and conquer in the name of the Pope.
In the name of the Pope? Like, I think he's reading too much into it. This existed prior to, like, it. There's things like this in the 7th century with Heraclius and things like this. But yeah, let's keep going.
So the war changes into a pilgrimage. Violence becomes a...
Well, the whole thing is a pilgrimage. It's a pilgrimage where it's an armed pilgrimage. That's what it was, because they knew they were going through hostile territory.
Spiritual act accepted by the Catholic Church as a form of martyrdom. And authority is totally centralized under the papacy. And so what Byzantium asked as a strategic...
Now, notice how this guy keeps saying the papacy, because when Orthodox, and not just Orthobros, Orthodox in general, think about the Catholic Church, all they think about is the papacy.
Alliance, the West proclaimed as a sacred war. The central problem, they are two completely different expectations. You see, Byzantium control...
I wouldn't say they're different, because if you see the Council of Clermont, there's 5 speeches at Clermont. You can go and search them up. You can search them online. There's about 5 accounts of it. They're all very different, but they all, like, they talk about helping out their brothers in the East. That's true, but I don't want to get too much into that because he's
military aid.
But also about getting Jerusalem too. So it's like, let's go help out our friends in the East, and once we're through with that, we'll secure the Holy Land back into Christian hands.
They wanted a restoration of imperial lands. They wanted some obedience of the Western soldiers to the Orthodox emperor, since he...
maybe. I'd like to see proof.
He's the one that's giving them money, giving them food, aiding them in more weaponry, giving them horses when they don't have it. This was all part of the expectation. But because it's, again, Pope Urban II and the call of this holy war in the First Crusade, it totally changes the perspective. And mind you, in the East, they didn't have the same understanding that if you just go and die in defense of, let's say, the patriarch.
It's nothing about dying. It's a pilgrimage. It's the pilgrimage that's penitential. He's thinking of like jihad, if you die in battle.
Or Byzantium, that you're sinless. It actually wasn't that at all. In the Orthodox perspective, we're not pacifists, so soldiers go and they fight in battle. The difference is, for the Orthodox, you as a military soldier, and say you were one of the top generals, the Orthodox, the Byzantine Empire is filled with incredible generals, incredible soldiers. But if you killed, again, you would have to confess to a priest how many people you killed, what you did in battle, and you would be given penitence, and you would be
You have to do that in the Catholic Church too.
taken away from the Eucharist, and then um, uh, reinstituted into the body of Christ to commune during the liturgical services. So this was the modus operandi of the Orthodox Church. War was seen as necessary, unfortunately, due to the fall. It was a necessary aspect
That's
of
the
life,
Catholic view too.
but they did not sacralize war or the mass.
And the whole idea of the indulgence is time out of purgatory. It's not. I mean, if you die in mortal sin on a crusade fighting the Muslims, you go to hell. The pilgrimage won't
killing of non-Orthodox Christians as a form of salvation, as a form of indulgence. You see, what Pope Urban does is he offers all people going to the Holy Land to fight indulgences that if they go there, they don't have to worry about their sins anymore. The Pope has eradicated
no. Oh my friend.
their sins. And so from the very beginning, both sides think they're cooperating, but they're not. They're not playing the same game. You see, I have totally different ambitions.
No, there's a large overlap, and he makes a misrepresentation. I don't think he's lying here, but he is misinformed with what he's
for the crusading Latins. It's a religious mission. It's totally independent of leadership, and that's why even amongst the Crusaders, there's so much infighting.
Yeah, no, it was controlled by committee. That's like the it's such an inefficient way to control an army, but they managed to pull it off. It's pretty impressive.
We'll get into today. And there's differences between even their own goals. We'll find some of the Crusaders actually live up to their loyalty, because when the Crusaders get to Constantinople and the emperor has to usher them across the Bosphorus so they can actually get into Asia and then move through Anatolia down into the Levant, they have to make an oath to Alexios I that any land that the Crusaders conquer must be given back to the Byzantine emperor. And
that was part of the empire prior to the Turkish invasion.
In exchange, the Byzantine emperor will support their crusade through money, through food, through weapons, through horses, through navigational access, giving them various guides to show them how to get around the territory or how to avoid the Seljuks in this particular field, or whatever it may be. And that all ends once Antioch is taken over, the siege of Antioch, which lasts for a long time. I mean, the crusade is almost over right when it gets started with the siege of Antioch. And by a miracle, the Catholics, right at the last moment, are able to take Antioch right before a horde of Muslims arrive to destroy their siege. And once they take over Antioch, Beaumont, he is a Norman prince of southern Italy. He decides that he is going to become the de facto king of Antioch and establish his own principality.
Yeah, he's kind of the hero of the battle. He takes the citadel because, like, as soon as you get into the walled city, there's still an armed citadel where the troops are,
and goes directly in opposition to.
According to Fulcher of Chartres, there was like 60,000 troops in the citadel. That's probably over exaggeration, probably a few thousand.
The oath that he gave Alexios, and this is the first major turning point between the Orthodox and the Catholics regarding the crusade. From the Orthodox perspective, the Crusaders are unloyal, they are greedy, and they're opportunistic. And you can't trust anything that they say or do. And the entire history of the Crusades is them saying one thing and then going back on their word. And so
I'd like to see some examples of that. His prime example, I'm going to refute. I'm going to soundly refute that example.
The entire trajectory of the Crusades is not about, and this is from the Orthodox perspective, the entire trajectory of the Crusades is not about the conquest of Jerusalem and Baldwin the First, king of Jerusalem. No. It's that from the beginning, what began as a Christian holy war immediately saw the Latins view the Byzantines as an enemy in and of themselves. Well, and so they then go on to create their own principalities and states in the Levant, the Byzantines basically step back and say, all right, then you guys are on your own. You've betrayed us. You've gone back on your word. By the time of the Second Crusade, they're totally incompetent. I mean, Conrad the Third gets annihilated just trying to get through Anatolia.
Yeah, no, Conrad was in the Second Crusade. Conrad was, yeah, he was incompetent. King Louis VII was a bit better. He actually makes it down to the Holy Land, but once they're in the Holy Land, they made a really stupid decision to attack Damascus, which was a city held by a Muslim group that was actually their ally. This was so stupid. And then it backfired. They turned a friend into an enemy. Because I'm not going to get into that right now because he essentially skips over that. But yeah, Conrad was useless. He was wiped out. His army was wiped out at Derilium, where they had a battle 50 years by. Because at that point, the Turks had devised countermeasures to Western knights. The knights were the total imbalanced unit. They were totally broken. You have knights, but they've started learning how to fight against the knights at that point, and the knights weren't prepared for that. So
some of them can't even get to the Levant, and this cements the Byzantine understanding. But it ends in the sacking of Constantinople. And if you don't understand,
I really hope he gives the context to the sacking of Constantinople, because there is a huge context.
This Byzantine perspective, you probably wonder, how the heck does the Fourth Crusade end with the Latin Catholics and the Venetians sacking Constantinople when at the same time they're appealing to Constantinople to help them on their Fourth Crusade back to the Holy Land? Well, the only way you understand it is to see that by 1204, which is the sacking of Constantinople in the Fourth Crusade,
I doubt he knows the context for that. I know the Fourth Crusade. I read every primary source on the Fourth Crusade, and a lot of it more than once. In fact, a lot of it several times. Like, I know that crusade. I know it like the back of my hand. And I really hope. I can't remember. I kind of listened to this like while I was driving, and I was multitasking, and I really hope he gives the context of the Fourth Crusade, because the Byzantines are at fault too.
From the 800s forward, from 1054 forward, from 1095 is the Council of Clermont, where Pope Urban II calls the Holy War the First Crusade. There is an animosity already built in between the Catholics and the Orthodox. And it's that sentiment, it's that jealousy. You see, here's what each side had going for them.
Jealousy? No. There were a lot of Eastern prejudices against the Catholics. They hated how they used the unleavened bread. And like, we fasted on Saturday. And it's funny, they accuse us of not fasting, but back then they accused us of fasting on Saturday. All these Pharisaical, like, oh, you're pre-shave, all this Pharisaical stuff. But no, just they couldn't accept the fact that Christianity is practiced in different places than Christendom. You just need the right doctrine. It's okay if you do your mass a bit different. It's okay if your fasting traditions are a bit different.
The Catholic West had the superior warrior, the knight.
At that time,
the horseback knight was the superior warrior. It was the ultimate warrior in the world at the time, with their metal protective garb, the size of their horses, the weaponry, even the strength of the men. I mean, some of the Muslims commented how strong some of the Crusader men were.
Frankish charge.
But here's what the Byzantines had. They had the heritage of Christianity. They had all the important relics in Constantinople.
The heritage of Christianity. What? There was no Christianity in the West before that? Like, come on.
They were the seat of the highest civilization in the world at the time.
Yeah,
and they were incredibly wealthy and opulent. And there was an arrogance of the Byzantines.
Oh, there was.
Because the average aristocrat in Constantinople was, well-read and fluent with Plato and Aristotle and just philosophy. The type of conversation happening in Constantinople, let's face it, was more cultured and superior than other parts of Europe. And that led to a sort of arrogance of the Byzantine side to say, look, we are culture, we are civilization, we are the highest expression on the planet at the time. Those Europeans, the Western Europeans, they have great knights, but they don't have culture. And that is mocked by even the regular Orthodox people. All right, we're not even talking about inside Constantinople. We're not even talking about the emperor. We're talking about on the trip of the Crusaders through Byzantine lands. The regular people noted how uncultured, how disrespectful, how rude the Western Crusaders were.
You know, we don't have anything written by commoners, though. Like, we got stuff by Anna Karenina, and we got stuff by other people, but we don't have anything written by the commoner. And I'm sure the commoners in Anatolia were grateful when the Crusaders liberated their land from the Turks, so they didn't have to pay a jizya anymore.
To the Orthodox. And so realize all of this tension is ultimately built in. And so what begins as hope, the Byzantines request Western aid, it arrives. And in fact, the First Crusade actually begins in what appears to be success. The various princes who come from France and Germany and Italy to begin in the First Crusade, they actually do reconquer land from the Seljuk Turks, and that is given back to the Byzantine Empire.
Yes.
And as then Alexios gives them more money, more food, more opportunity, they move down into the Levant, and they eventually do take Antioch. And once they take Antioch, the Crusaders have essentially turned their back on Alexios, even though.
Because Alexius turned their back on the Crusaders. That's what he never says in this entire thing.
Oh. Later, they'll get upset that Alexios doesn't give them more money and more aid and more.
Okay. The reason, I don't know if I should explain this now or wait. I'm going to wait.
Assistance, despite the fact that they're.
No, I'm going to say it now. Because the Crusaders, like all the big shots, make an oath in Constantinople. If you capture any land that used to belong to the empire, you give it back to the emperor. And the emperor will help them out. And they said, okay. And then so they go to take Nicaea. They give it back to the emperor. They go down through Anatolia, and the emperor's coming behind them with his troops, essentially doing the mop-up operations. And once they get to Antioch, they get trouble, because Antioch is a huge city, like think trying to attack New York, right? Huge city at the time. Well, you have Antioch back then. That was like the New York of the day. No city even close was like that. Constantinople was the closest big city, but no other city was like that. So imagine trying to attack New York, and it had super huge fortifications. And that's the first big obstacle they had on the crusade, Antioch. And what happened is they're taking it, and it's taken a long time to siege it. And then people start deserting. They're panicking. The crusade is, and then some crusaders flee back. They abandon the crusade, and they're going through Anatolia. They run into the emperor, who was going to help them out at Antioch. And then when he was helping them out at Antioch, he runs into these crusaders who had deserted, and then basically they said, look, it's a lost cause at Antioch. The crusade is probably already destroyed. Just go out here and save your skin. That's what I'm doing. And so he's going back to Europe, and then the emperor's like, oh, wow, I better get back to Constantinople. And then the crusaders hear about this. Then they break their oaths, because the emperor had broken it first. The emperor reneged on his agreement. That's why when they captured Nicaea, it went back to the emperor, no problem. When they captured southwestern Anatolia, goes back to the emperor. When they capture Antioch eventually, since they'd already broken ties with the emperor because he had betrayed their oath, so he's like, all right, we're not going to honor our oath anymore. It's a two-way street, and the emperor broke it first. And Dr. Harry never brings this up.
They're literally telling him, we are not going to give you, we break our oath. We lied to you. We're going to take the land whether you want it or not.
They lied? No, and they were honest.
From a Western, we
honest. that's why everything prior to Antioch went back to the emperor.
Never hear this perspective about the Crusades. We never hear
Love.
what it's ultimately about. And so immediately, once Antioch is taken by Beaumont of Toronto, we see that they have totally different goals. The crusading Latins and the Eastern Byzantine, they have totally different goals. And betrayal is the first example in Antioch. And it's ultimately the ultimate betrayal is the Fourth Crusade, which the Byzantines were not expecting, right?
I wonder if he's ever read anything on the Fourth Crusade, because most people just think, oh, the Crusaders hated the Greeks because they were schismatic, so on our way to the Holy Land, we sacked Constantinople. No, there is a huge story behind that not a lot of people know. And if he gets into it, I'm going to make them the story. But there are a lot of Byzantine bad apples there. I mean, if the Byzantines had just paid the Crusaders what they owed them in the Fourth Crusade, none of this would have happened. They only paid them half of what they owed them. They owed them 200,000. I can't remember what currency they were using, but 200,000 of that currency. They paid 100,000, and they also made other promises too. But if they'd have honored their promises that they had made to Alexius IV, there would be no sack of Constantinople. So you're right, it was Stephen of Blois. And when Stephen of Blois gets back to Europe, he gets home right when he hears that Jerusalem has been taken. Then his wife's like, get back there, you know. Anyway, Stephen of Blois, yeah. So
they thought that they were going to help the Venetians and the Normans and the Franks and the Germans go back and do another crusade, of which number 2 and number 3 were unsuccessful.
Well, 3 was partially successful. 2 was unsuccessful.
They weren't successful. You could say the most Crusade 2 is totally unsuccessful. They accomplished nothing.
Exactly.
Crusade 3 is Richard the Lionheart, the great warrior from England, King of England. And he was an incredible warrior, but he had no interest in aiding the Byzantines, because by this point,
well, because the whole reason of the Third Crusade is not to help the Byzantines; it's to get Jerusalem back, because it had fallen to Saladin in October of 1187. That was the whole reason for the crusade. It's not about helping the Byzantines at that point. The Byzantines are doing all right at that point. They have that huge chunk of Anatolia that the Crusaders had won for them, that Dr. Harry sounds pretty ungrateful for. If there hadn't been a first crusade, the Byzantines would have never got Anatolia back. And Constantinople would have fallen much quicker, far quicker than 1453. And even after they get Constantinople back in 1261, they still own huge swaths of Anatolia. So, I mean, he's pretty cute with this.
Once you're in the years 800s, the Holy Roman Empire has an immense animosity towards the Byzantine Empire, because the Byzantines are the true Romans. But the Holy Roman Empire, under the Pope, wants to revalidate its Roman identity, and they hate the fact that the Byzantine Constantinople Empire is the remnant of the true Roman Empire. And that's why the Pope makes his pact with Charlemagne in the year 800 on Christmas Day. So
it wasn't really a pact.
All of this is leading into it. And so the Crusades are not a story of...
But that was a quarter of a millennia before the schism. Okay, so you can't really blame the schism on that.
Steady progress, but from an Orthodox perspective, a gradual unraveling. And once the Orthodox were able to retake Constantinople after the 57 years that the Latins were able to hold it and make the Byzantines actually have an empire in Nicaea over in Anatolia.
Again, there were several successor states.
The Orthodox people, this Orthodox front of the Orthodox world, is in opposition to the Catholic West. And so,
well, that was the case in the 11th century.
Once you get to the Council of Florence, because it's another very...
Okay, that's way later.
Very similar thing happens. We see the pattern. The Ottoman Turks at this point surrounding Constantinople, right? This is before the fall of Constantinople in the 15th century. What do? They appeal back to the Pope again. They appeal back to the West. Guys, can we get money? We need soldiers. The Ottomans are getting ready to take Constantinople. The Byzantine Empire is getting ready to fall. And they have the Council of Florence, and there's an agreement that they're going to reunite under the Pope, right? But when these bishops get back to their Orthodox lands, they're lambasted by the Orthodox. They don't want anything to do with the Catholics. They would rather.
They complained about being Azamites. Oh, no, we're Azamites now, even though the Council of Florence says they can continue to use the bread that's specific to their custom, the leavened bread. Well, the Latins use the unleavened bread. See, the Latins never cared what the Greeks used, but the Greeks cared what the Latins used for some reason. There was immense Pharisaical prejudice.
Die under the Ottoman Turks and be subjugated than to live peacefully under the Pope because of all of this history that already occurred before. And that's why the Orthodox lands despised the bishops after the Council of Florence that wanted to unite with the Pope, because they said, how could you? How could you unite with them after what they've done to us? And so from...
Well, like what they did to them? Like what 250 years earlier?
Like, the Orthodox perspective here, it's not primarily Christianity versus Islam. It's Orthodoxy, Catholicism, and Islam. And even in mixed Islam, it's Sunni versus Shia, as we'll see. But the division...
That's true. In the First Crusade, when the Crusaders took Jerusalem, they took from the Fatimids, a Shia empire based out of Africa. And the person that gives the coup de grace to the Fatimids is actually not the Crusaders, but Saladin, who was a hardcore Sunni, and he was super anti-Shia. And
within Christendom is actually the main emphasis here from the Orthodox perspective. And the Catholics develop a new theology, a new understanding of indulgences and penance
that existed prior
through a holy war. And this is why, honestly, some of the Crusaders acted in absolutely debaucherous ways, because they fully believed.
I'm not going to defend the actions of every Crusader. Some Crusaders did behave horrifically.
That whatever sins they committed, if they die in battle during the Crusades, they will be sinless, because the Pope told them that.
No.
And so, yes, some atrocities occurred. I mean, in the sacking of Constantinople, we see Latins raping Orthodox women. We see...
In one account, there is some Latins go to rape an Orthodox girl, but other Latin Crusaders stop them before it happens. The whole idea of the looting of the city was to pay the money they owed them. So they said, all right, we'll pay ourselves then.
Them burning down.
And by the way, two emperors, Alexius IV and Isaac II, that's a father-son combination, agreed to pay them this. So this was an official imperial debt they owed the Crusaders.
Destroying Orthodox churches.
They looted them.
And it's something that the Orthodox world has never forgot. And so...
Well, I think they haven't forgot it, because let's be honest, since the schism, what have the Orthodox done for Christianity apart from shrink? They've shrunk. Like, what they had at the time of the schism has like vanished. Like, they've vanished as a church. What have they done? They haven't gone on any missions, spread the thing. So they essentially try to find excuses for that, and they say, oh yeah, we've never forgotten that. Well, you've never done anything for Christ, really. I mean, when you have the Byzantine emperor, what did you do to evangelize the Turks? The Catholics did more to evangelize the Turks than the Orthodox did. The Orthodox were right next door. Anyway.
So from the ultimate perspective on the Crusade, from the Byzantine vantage point, is that it's an undermining of Byzantine civilization. It's a brotherly, jealous attack and betrayal when they least expected it. And it only...
They expected it. If you're talking about the Fourth Crusade,
the rift, the historical rift between the Greek East and the Latin West.
Yeah, but they were already separated.
That's a little bit of my opening monologue. Let me hit some super chats real quick. Look like some people sending some super chats, and then let me get into the video that covers the large general perspective that I just laid out. And then we'll get into more specifics, as we're going to be focusing specifically today on the First Crusade and the Fourth Crusade. Because by the Third Crusade, Byzantium has essentially turned their back, as the Crusaders have turned their back on Byzantium.
Yeah, Byzantium was allied with Saladin, and it wasn't really about Byzantium. Yes, Frederick was going through Byzantine lands, and boy, that was an interesting episode. You got Isaac II, who wouldn't ferry them across, and then you have Frederick captures the city of Adrianople, and I think he threatens to burn it to the ground. He's like, "I'll burn the city to the ground unless you let me cross." And the emperor's like, "Okay, we'll funnel you across." And then
in the Second Crusade, there was still an open hand from Byzantium to help the Crusaders, of which, because of the disasters that occurred in the Second Crusade, the Byzantines essentially roll their eyes and say, "Look how incompetent they just throw soldiers out here and expect to win victory against these Muslims." So,
well, Conrad was a bad crusader. King Louis VII had better luck against the Turks.
Smash that like,
he
guys.
won some battles against them. But he screws up once he gets down to the Holy Land.
Silvar Ogre
He's
became a new member. Thank you so much, brother. God bless you. Really appreciate you. Bryce throws into it enough. So, without further ado, let's watch the first video that I have for you guys.
But
and as I said, this is a general overview of a Byzantine perspective of the entire Crusades. Then we're going to step back out. We're going to go into the study guide, and we're going to get into the specifics. And you can see here, I got the First Crusades, Second Crusade, Third Crusade, Fourth Crusade, and then what the Catholics stole from Constantinople. We're not going to be watching much from the Second or the Third Crusade. Maybe a little bit on the Second Crusade, on really the fall of the Western powers. And then the Fourth Crusade, we'll watch a little bit of John Vatatzis, and then we'll, sadly, I mean, this is actually hard to watch as an Orthodox Christian, is what was lost in the sack of Constantinople. We're talking about some of the most
they took a lot of relics,
precious items in all of Christianity. Even today, some of the most precious items and relics you could even imagine were stolen, some of them broken. Some of the relics they would just break into pieces and then spread around Europe.
I know they did that with the altar, the high altar in Hagia Sophia, but
so anyways, we're going to get into all that, but first let's begin here.
Robert of Clary's Chronicle is where they give a list of everything.
Setting the stage.
In 968, the Holy Roman Emperor Otto II sent the Bishop of Cremona, Liutprand, to forge a marriage alliance with the Eastern Roman Empire.
Oh, by the way, his writings are really good. Very good source for the time. Liutprand of Cremona. And he talks about being in Constantinople.
When the emissary arrived at Constantinople, he was forced to stand in the rain for hours, and then was accommodated in a crumbling castle before he finally met Emperor Nicephorus II Phocas, who insulted.
This is like 100 years plus several decades before the First Crusade.
Liutprand was not even allowed to purchase the famous purple cloth, since it was considered too precious for barbarians.
So what's it highlighting right here? It's highlighting that even in the years 800, so here we have the Holy Roman Empire rivaling the actual Roman Empire, the Byzantines.
This is the 900s.
When an emissary comes, there's already animosity, to the point that the Emperor of Byzantium left the emissary in the rain for 2 hours and gave him a small decrepit castle to stay in, and wouldn't even let him buy the imperial purple, which was so rare in the world at that time. It was incredible.
Yeah, the purple was the rarest of all the snails. Like you get the dye from snails, and the purple was the rarest, so it was the most expensive, so therefore the kings like to
valuable to have the purple robe. That's why Byzantium is always associated with the color purple.
As we can see, even before the East-West Schism and Crusades, the Byzantines were notoriously arrogant towards any people who were not their own, an attitude which was sure to sour the relations with potential military or trade partners. But the relations between the East and West were particularly complicated, as both sides saw each other as a necessary evil. Pragmatism led to compromise, but in these conditions, time and proximity brought out the worst in both parties. For centuries, Catholic and Orthodox communities had very limited contact, as both were mostly concerned with their regional enemies. But the Norman and Seljuk invasion led to a new level of desperation for the newly founded Komnenian dynasty, which opened a bridge between these worlds.
So let me go back here just to show you on the map. So you can see this is Alexios Komnenos has already ascended to emperor of the Byzantine Empire. And Alexios is one of our good emperors, by the way. Alexios the First is one of the better, I would say, top 10 of the emperors of the Byzantine Empire. So he's who's ruling Byzantium at this point. You can see his empire in Anatolia is totally taken over by the Seljuk Turks, the Principality of Rum there. And they really just have their Balkans territory.
Yeah, because they call themselves the Roman Empire as well. Like the Roman Empire was like the thing to be. If you're emperor of the Romans, that's like being president of the United States. Like everyone wanted to be. That's why you have the Holy Roman Empire and the Sultanate of Rum out of Iconium. That's why Rumi, the Persian poet, was actually born in Iconium, because that was part of the Roman Empire of Rum, the Sultanate of Rum. That's why he's called Rumi. He's not from Persia. Was born in Turkey. And that's why he's called Rumi, because was born in the capital of Rum. Anyway.
And then some of these spots around the Black Sea. This is all because, again, this Battle of Manzikert, which is over here. It's on the sort of eastern section of what would be Anatolia, considered Anatolia, under Georgia. They lose that battle, and that sets the stage for all of this conquest that occurs. So the Turks basically take all of what was just a.
One time I was listening to a thing, I think it was by Thomas Madden, and he talks about the Battle of Manzikert. It's like the Turks, and they're going to be with us till the end of this. And they were with them till the end. They're the ones who gave the coup de grace
years ago, all Byzantine territory.
For the newly founded Komnenian dynasty, which opened a bridge between these worlds. Luckily for us today, the 5 major historians who characterized this era were very talented writers with unique access to the state, who covered the Crusader period extensively.
I wonder how much Dr. Harry has read.
Anna Komnene, the daughter of Alexios. John Kinematos, a bureaucrat and confidant of
John Kinemos. He did biographies of. You have Anna Komnene did the biography of Alexius. John Kinemos does biographies of John and Manuel, mainly Manuel. His section on John is short because, keep in mind, John was only emperor for, I guess, 25 years. From 1118 to 43.
Manuel I, Nikitas Honyatis, a judge and civil servant. Michael Selos, a savant and counselor. And finally, George Acropolites, a child.
I don't have Acropolites. That book is just too freaking expensive. I want it so bad. I might just break the bank one of these days, but I'm trying to find it for cheap. But it's not. But let me get back here for a second. I gotta get some things. These are the books he has. He's got Anna Komnene. This is Anna Komnene right here. What was the second one? The second one was John Kinematos or John Kinemos right here. Niketas Kunyatis, great source, great book. And then Michael Selos. I got 2 other books by Michael Selos. He wrote a lot. I'm not going to fetch them now, but this is what he's talking about that's relevant to the situation, specifically Manzikert. But I've not read Acropolites because the book is so bloody expensive. It's like $300 Canadian, which is like what, $250 American or something. It's so expensive, and I'll get it one of these days.
Commander. The first major challenge that Alexios Komnenos faced was the Norman invasion of Robert Guiscard in 1081.
Robert Guiscard, he was the father of Bohemond of Toronto, who our friend Dr. Harry has talked about.
And this is the Bohemond who is going to betray Alexios. So this Norman king right here who rules the southern part of Italy,
he's the
not only is he going to invade Byzantium, but he's going to be one of the Crusaders. This is in 1081, right? So this is 16 years before the actual Crusades start. And we already see this is why the Byzantines, they'll deal with the Franks, they'll deal with the Papists, but they really don't like the Normans. They really don't like the Normans.
Following the defeat at the Battle of Dyrrhachium, the Roman manpower was severely depleted,
modern-day
Albania, to rely on mercenaries. As a direct result, Alexios used diplomacy and cunning to strike a deal with Venice, who agreed to act as the imperial navy in the Adriatic in return for exclusive trading rights. Additionally, Alexios bribed many Normans.
That's why they got a quarter in Constantinople. If you read about medieval Constantinople, there was a Venetian quarter. There was also a Genoese quarter and a Pisan quarter, and
who deserted and joined his army and court. The war was won with the Battle of Larissa, but suddenly the Byzantine populace found out they had more contact with Western Europe than ever before. The circumstance of the West's arrival led to the first major prejudice of the state and people towards the newcomers, that they were greedy and opportunistic. Those traits would become a staple and were repeated by virtually every Eastern chronicler. Even when describing Norman allies, the Roman court labeled them as the barbarians bearing the double-edged sword on their shoulders, a people that should...
There were the barbarians, they referred to everyone as barbarians. It wasn't just the Westerners. They refer, if you read Neketas Kunyatas, what the video just said, it refers to the Serbians as barbarians, and the Serbians are fellow Orthodox, but they're referred to as barbarians. They called everyone barbarians.
Not be trusted and should be seen as distinctly other. These fears were not unfounded, as the Normans, hired for their incredible martial prowess, continuously betrayed them by carving out their own domains in Anatolia.
That is the Norman prince that I told you when Alexios, and this is before he was emperor, asked for Norman help, and he was actually part of the reconquest of Anatolia. This is the guy that ends up betraying the Byzantines the first time before the Crusades and establishes his own state in Anatolia instead of fighting the Turks.
Yeah, further cementing the animosity between both parties. As for the Venetians, who arrived at the coastal cities and established their own colonies, at first, some chroniclers, like Anna Komnena, were surprised at their high levels of loyalty, bravery, and economic resourcefulness. Others regarded them as poor cousins of the empire, who were not quite barbaric, but were almost as crude and ill-mannered as other Westerners. Some merchants and guild artisans quickly became envious of the Venetian success and demanded that the Italians pay the same trade tax as the locals did. Otherwise, the Roman economy would soon become dependent on the foreigners. But it was the belief that they were inferior that made the court ignore such warnings. It is important to remember that the average denizen of Constantinople was walking amongst the marble masterpieces of the ancient world, prayed in the most beautiful churches in Christianity, filled with sacred relics. The aristocracy read Aristotle and the Iliad, and all citizens felt the protection of the massive Theodosian walls. From their perspective, everyone else was uncultured and would fade away in time. Traditional Roman warfare proved inefficient against the Seljuk threat, so Alexios used his treasury, cunning agents, and relics to attract the attention of Western Europe, which was catalyzed by the preaching of Urban II and Peter the Hermit. Over 100,000 men, women, and children entered Byzantine lands and crossed into Anatolia.
This is called the People's Crusade. So Peter the Hermit ends up leading, I'm talking women, children, men, old people.
Yeah, he did lead them, but he was, I believe, he wasn't with them at the time. They crossed into Anatolia. I think he was still in Constantinople, because I believe during the siege of Antioch, he tries to like abandon the crusade, but they catch him and bring him back. But no, the first wave of the crusade was essentially like farmers with pitchforks. They're not knights, they're not soldiers. They're essentially like farmers with pitchforks, and they raid a few, Turkish forts. But once they come up to the main Turkish army, they're completely wiped out. I think some are sold off as slaves, the rest are killed. And when the main force crosses into Anatolia, they walk by the pile of dead bodies and they pay their respects.
In an attempt to go back to the Holy Land. Now they're going to get annihilated. They're going to get wiped out. But this is the first wave regarding the first crusade. The first people to arrive is called the People's Crusade.
That's half true. There were two big parts of the Fourth Crusade, the Venetians and the French. The Venetians were excommunicated, the French weren't. Long story there. I won't get into it now because we're not really, that's not part of what he's talking about.
By Peter the Hermit.
Described by Anna as the Celts, as one might guess.
That really annoyed me. She just kept calling them the Celts. Obviously, they're not Celts.
Are in any case an exceptionally hot-headed race and passionate, but let them once find an inducement and they become irresistible. Initially, this was a well-coordinated operation in which the Emperor supplied various Crusader contingents as they made their way to the Holy Land. But in one crucial moment, history changed forever. Alexios was firmly in charge, but as he made his way towards the siege of Antioch, he was met by one of the Crusader leaders who deserted.
Like I said, the Crusaders deserted and told him to go back. And that is when he that's when they repudiate their oath, because they had been betrayed by the Emperor. And yeah, prior to then, the Emperor got to keep everything.
And told Alexios that the situation was hopeless. It seemed that the First Crusade was over, so the army turned back. But once they arrived at Constantinople...
So, Dr. Harry, why is that not a betrayal? Because they promised to support them, and they were going to support them, but Stephen of Blois said it was hopeless, so he took bad advice, the Emperor, but he still went back on his part.
News arrived that the Franks had captured the city and kept it for themselves. That is the way of all the barbarians. Their mouths gape wide for gifts and money, but they have no intention whatever of doing the things for which the money is offered.
Yeah, well, they gave back Nicaea, they gave back the other parts of
Voice was set, demanding that the Latins keep the oath they swore and return the great city to the empire.
Good luck
but in
with that.
Response, the barbarian lunatic, in his frenzied rage, absolutely refused to listen. He could not bear either the truth of these words or the frankness of the envoys, and immediately reacted in the Frankish way. Glorying in his own boastfulness, he babbled that he would set his throne high above the stars, and threatened to bore with his spear point through the walls of Babylon. He spoke with emphasis of his might, mouthing out the word character, how he was undaunted, how no one could withstand him. He confidently assured the envoys that whatever happened, he would never release his grip on Antioch, that all Romans were to him nothing more than ants, the feeblest of living things. Despite the eventual success of the crusade, it marked the moment when the West turned from a necessary evil to an existential threat, one which consumed the minds of the nobles and commoners alike until the very end of the empire. John II Komnenos had the difficult task of filling his father's shoes and restoring balance to the empire. He waged successful wars against the Turks, Crusaders, and Hungarians, but in his attempts to put the Venetians in check, he angered his greatest naval and trading partner. In 1124, he denied the privileges granted by Alexios without building a formidable navy in case the Venetians contested it. They not only did so, but also plundered the islands of Rhodes, Chios, Samos, Lesbos, and even captured Kefalonia.
So this is happening during the Second Crusade or leading up to the Second Crusade?
Prior to the second, like 20 years before the second.
The Venetians, because they had a privileged position within the Byzantine Empire and had lower taxes,
that the emperor had given them.
and had their own quarters in Constantinople. Again, a unique status within the Byzantine Empire. When the son of Alexios, John II, rescinds that unique offer that gave the Venetians privileged status, they start ransacking Byzantine islands.
Before John reaffirmed their rights and even
I'm not going to defend the Venetians. I'm under no obligation to do that.
expanded their quarter in Constantinople. By that time, however, both sides looked at each other suspiciously and wondered how they could exploit one another
Well, at least he made
rather
it.
than having a mutually beneficial relationship. The final war John started saw him muster a giant force which marched towards Antioch. But along the way, the emperor went on a boar hunt in the Tarsus Mountains, where he accidentally cut himself on a poison arrow. He died a
Dies on a boar.
few days later, and
Sounds like Robert Baratheon.
his last act was to choose his younger son, Manuel, as his successor instead of his brother Isaac, in line with the AIMA prophecy, which claimed that the name of each successor in the empire had to align with the Greek word for blood. It was Manuel who would turn the partnership with the West to a complete dependency in his hopes to restore the Roman Empire.
Manuel had a pretty good relationship with the West. He even helped the Crusader states attack the Fatimids in Egypt at one time. He provided the naval support for an attack they had.
The third Komnenian ruler was obsessed
In the 1160s, I can't remember the year.
with the Latin world and spent the rich treasury of his predecessor in an attempt to forge powerful.
So Manuel the first, he stabilizes the empire, but he's not, the Orthodox don't look incredibly fondly on him because he was very pro-Western.
Keep in mind, unlike several other later emperors, he was always in communion. He stayed Orthodox Christian till the very end. He was never in communion with Rome himself. In fact, he would tinker with the Greek liturgy and change some of their doctrines, especially how they interpreted John 14:28. He threatened everyone who disagreed with him, punishments, excommunication, and death. That's how the Caesaropapism worked that way. He had 3 theological controversies that he solved. And on some, like if the Muslims worship the same God, he kind of coerced them into signing his document. And they actually changed the liturgy based on that.
He was enamored with Western culture and all these different things, and extended essentially depleted the imperial treasury to paying Westerners to come and do things, or knights and that type of thing. So he does stabilize.
He was friendly with the West. What can I say?
The Byzantine
I like
Empire
the
during
guy.
this period.
Not a good theologian, by the way, but I don't think he was a bad guy.
But he ends up emptying the treasuries of the imperial coffers.
And Manuel also does this huge kind of holy war against the Turks, the Battle of Myrocephalon, which I think they talk about here, in 1176, and it fails. And then his son Alexius II takes over, but he's only a boy, and we're getting ahead of us.
He invited numerous foreigners to his court, adopted their customs, hosted jousting tournaments, allied the papacy, ransomed Latin knights, picked Latin brides for his family. While
it says he allied with the papacy. Keep in mind, he was never a Catholic. He may have been friendly with them, but he was always an Orthodox Christian.
he married Maria of Antioch. He planned the diplomatic annexation of Hungary, whose ruler, Bela, was renamed to Alexios to fit the prophecy after he was designated as his heir. He built a massive fleet, which he used to counter the growing Venetian monopoly by crushing their fleet in 1171 at Chios, and used it 6 years later in an attempt to reconquer Egypt, which ultimately failed. To make up for the soured Venetian relations, Manuel invited Pisan and Genoese merchants who received their own quarters.
See, Pisan and Genoese get their quarter too, so.
The emperor focused on the imperial external problems, while completely neglecting the domestic situation. And while he had numerous allies abroad, the majority of his nobles, clergy, and commoners hated him. In their eyes, the state favored the Western army, navy, and merchants. In the capital, Venetians and other Italians were no longer seen as threats, but enemies. They didn't contact the same enemies the state fought on the boundaries of the empire. What they saw were rich Latins who stole their jobs and carried Roman wealth back to their homeland. The colonies were under the state's protection and featured entire communities with their own Catholic churches and clergy. Despite being located in the heart of the empire, the colonies were under foreign jurisdiction, and any crimes committed against them were resolved by an Italian judge. Merchants could marry into noble families and even buy their own titles, and while they continued to be a minor player in Byzantine politics, it demonstrated a level of social mobility unattainable for the ordinary Roman citizen. William of Tyre praises Manuel, describing him as a great-souled man of incomparable energy, who relied so implicitly on the Latins' fidelity and ability that he passed over.
Yeah, he was friendly with the Catholics. He wasn't very petty or anything like people like Cerularius were or anything like that. No, he was friendly with them. Why not? Why wouldn't you be friends with your fellow Christians, even if you don't see eye to eye
the Greeks
on theology?
As soft and effeminate.
He wasn't an ortho bro. He wasn't an ortho bro. Oh, man. Mind you, I don't think any of the Byzantine emperors were ortho bros. You could say that the monks and the bishops were ortho bros. But I think for the most part, the emperors were very pragmatic on their relation. Because even though they were Orthodox, they had an empire to run. So they can't just be insulting people for using unleavened bread.
And entrusted important affairs to the Latins alone. By the end of his reign, the treasury was empty, the church union failed, the Hungarian inheritance failed, the diplomacy with the Kievan Rus won over only Galicia, the expansion in Italy was negligible, the Egyptian invasion failed, the merchant republics felt threatened, the Pope allied with the German emperor, who hated Byzantium, and most of all, a quarter of the army was lost during the Battle of Myriokephalon against the Sultanate of Rome.
Yeah, that was his kind of like holy war against the Turks, 1176. You can read John Kinemos on that and Michael Cognatus. It was kind of a stalemate, but they failed to get any more land back. So
the stage was set for a massive implosion, releasing decades of pent-up pressure. Upon Manuel's death, Byzantium was left in the hands of his Latin wife, Maria of Antioch, who ruled as regent, since their son Alexios was only 11.
Yeah.
Within 2 years, his uncle Andronikos emerged from his exile and led a popular...
This guy's freaking nasty. This is a guy who leads like who does the slaughter of the Latins.
Uprising in the capital, catalyzing the hatred towards foreigners, which spilled out into one of the most brutal massacres in history. According to some estimates, more people died that day than in the Nika riots, sack of Constantinople.
That's how bad it was. And by the way, 1204, there was maybe the casualties were very small in terms of human life, very small. There was a ton of looting, I won't deny that, but human life, the casualties were very small. Unlike this, where the like thousands were massacred.
And fall of Constantinople combined. In the eyes of the West, this was a brutal takeover, which replaced the pro-Latin regime with a very antagonistic one.
I don't know if you guys saw, so the uncle of Alexios II creates an up.
By the way, Andronicus has an ugly death, by the way. He's impaled in that hippodrome.
Uprising against the Latins due to all the animosity that the local denizens are losing money. They don't have jobs, whereas these
let's kill them.
Come in and they're making buku bucks from the empire, and then they're under their own jurisdiction. They're under their own legal system, and they take all that money back to Western Europe. It said, potentially, there's roughly around 60,000 Latins in Constantinople during this uprising, in which tens of thousands were killed by the Orthodox to try to displace them and get them out of the capital city.
When they had
the Holy Roman Empire threatened with invasion, Hungary conquered.
Dr. Harry seems pretty careless about this. I mean, if you want to be, they also killed the papal legate, who was a cardinal of the Catholic Church, and they chopped off his head and tied it to a leg of a dog who ran through the streets. Yeah, he seems pretty cavalier here. Dr. Harry does.
Much of the border territories, and a new Norman invasion sacked the second city of the empire in a devastating manner. 7,000 were slain, relics were destroyed, women were raped, and the invaders were seen urinating on the streets. In the words of Nikitas Honiates, Between us and them, the greatest gulf of disagreement has been fixed, and we are separated in purpose and diametrically opposed, even though we are closely associated and frequently share the same dwelling. Their inordinate hatred for us and our excessive disagreement with them allowed for no humane feeling between us. The following years would see the empire crack as pretender after pretender fought for the throne. Eventually,
yeah, you have I think it's 1185 or 86, Andronicus, because he wasn't just brutal to the Catholics; he was brutal to everyone. He was a horrific ruler. He gets impaled in the hippodrome, and I think his body's on display, and everyone whacks him. It's an ugly end. Then Isaac II takes over, and then in I think 1195, he's overthrown by his brother, and Alexius II. No, sorry, Isaac II is blinded and thrown in the dungeons of Constantinople, and his brother Alexius III reigns. Now, Alexius, who would eventually become Alexius IV, the son of Isaac II, he flees to the west to search for an army to restore him and his father to the throne. And then he finds the French and Venetian Crusaders, and this is where the Fourth Crusade comes. But we're not there yet, so I'm not going to jump the gun.
A 21-year-old pretender would make his way towards the assembling Fourth Crusade.
Oh, yeah. Just what I said, Alexius IV. You can see it says the fourth. Although he's not considered the fourth until he rules.
And make ridiculous promises of riches and church union if...
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He 200,000 of the currency. He would join the crusade himself with 10,000 men. He would unite the churches, and he would establish a permanent garrison of 500 Byzantine knights in the Holy Land. The Byzantines had their own knights as well. They made promises, and the Crusaders fulfilled their promise for him. They put him on the throne, and his dad Isaac II is like, "Wow, he made promises, but we're grateful, so we'll pay."
They would give him the throne.
I wonder if Dr. Harry brings this
the
up.
Crusaders and Venetians accepted and accomplished the task, only to receive orders and
they did their part.
Empty threats before the pretender was assassinated.
He was assassinated by a guy named Alexius Martzophilus, who then assumed the power as Alexius V. Because as soon as the Crusaders take the city, Alexius III, there's too many Alexiuses in this story, flees, but he takes a ton of the treasury with him. He flees during the night, but he takes a ton of treasury. So therefore, Alexius IV, when he is crowned, he can't pay them everything because Alexius III has taken all the money. And so then the people hate Alexius IV. The Crusaders don't like him because he's essentially gone back on his promise. The people don't like him because he's brought this foreign army and he's given away a ton of their money to them, not all the money, obviously. And so Alexius Martzophilus, Alexius V, kills him, overthrows him, usurps the leadership as Alexius V, and he tries to actually attack the Crusaders, but he's hugely unsuccessful. He's completely routed. They captured his standard. They captured the holy icon. They take into battle, and it was
once
ugly.
Again, the pendulum swung as a pro-Western regime was replaced with one that used them and vowed to destroy them, which led to the 1204 sack of Constantinople, an event which some contemporaries describe as the fall of Troy. In the beginning of his description of the sack, Choniates references Solon, an ancient Athenian statesman. He reveals how Solon warned of the rise of tyranny, recognizing that it was easier to eradicate an emerging evil in the very beginning, and thus prevent it taking root, than to cut it away and destroy it after it has grown and become very strong. When Solon's protestations were ignored, he warned that the Athenians would not be able to blame the gods for their future suffering. He continues to paint a savage picture where, maddened by war and murderous in spirit, boasting terribly, barking like Cerberus, and exhaling like Charon.
And that was during the Fourth Crusade, that video footage there of a Western Latin knight dragging an Orthodox girl. This is according to Western chronicles, right? So this is not even Eastern history. Western chronicles describe the knight dragging the girl by her hair and beginning to rape her in a house that he took over because the people fled. And luckily, there was 2 other crusading knights that found that abhorrent.
Well, at least he brings that
and
up.
went in there and stopped him and said, if you don't stop, we're going to kill you right now, basically. And he stopped. But that is what was going on during the sacking.
Well, no, like, no, if they did that, they put an end to it. What they did was looting. There was a ton of looting. Like, churches were looted, palaces were looted, but
We recommend you check out our video on what was lost during the sack to get a sense of how damaging these events were, not only to the Byzantine state, but its identity. When Nicetas fled to Nicaea, he was surprised to find out that he was shunned by its citizens, who blamed the fate of the now fallen empire on the decisions of its senate. Another chronicler by the name of George Acropolites recounts, "It seems, O
that's the one I
Italians,
haven't
that you
read.
no longer remember our ancient harmony, but no other nations were ever as harmonious as the Greci and the Italians. And this was only to be expected, for science and learning came to the Italians from the Greci. And after that point, so that they need not use their ethnic names, a new Rome was built to complement the elder one, so that all could be called Romans after the common name of such great cities, and have the same faith and the same name for it. And just as they received that noble name from Christ, so too did they take upon themselves the national name, and everything else was common to them, the magistracies, laws, literature, city councils, law courts, piety itself, so that there was nothing that was not common to those of the elder and new Rome. But oh, how things have changed." The following 5 decades were difficult, but the new generation learned to live in the shattered remnant of Byzantium, recalling its ancient glory days and despising what they now called the humiliated generation. The new Latin states were forced to keep almost all of the old customs, as the two were forced into an uneasy alliance against Bulgaria and other threats. Eventually, Constantinople was reconquered in 1261, but the scars of the last 2 centuries would never heal.
They say 51 or 61. I thought I heard 51. It's 61 either way.
Future crusades bypassed Byzantium, choosing to directly sail to the Holy Lands until the arrival.
Well, because they weren't to save Byzantium. And by the way, even in 1261, when they took Constantinople back, the empire still controlled huge swaths of Anatolia that the Crusaders had won back from them. They don't start to lose it really until the early 1300s, when they hired these Spanish mercenaries who were nuts, the Grand Catalan Company, and that kind of screwed everything up. And then eventually they start to lose more and more land, and eventually in the 1330s they lose Nicaea and Nicomedia, and essentially all their Anatolian holdings at that point. Maybe the city of Philadelphia was said to have some loyalty, but they essentially lost. Essentially, Anatolia was 99% of their Anatolian holdings were lost by 1330s.
Of the Ottomans. Ironically, the Crusades of Nicopolis and Varna saw most of the Catholic world unite to aid the Romans, who worried more about the Latins than the Sultans. The latter crusade was on the brink of saving Constantinople before the King of Poland, Lithuania, and Hungary died in battle. This.
You want to know who else died in that battle? Cardinal Cesarini. Cardinal Cesarini, who was one of the top Latin theologians at the Council of Florence. Him and Torquemada put the Greeks in their place. Same with Andrew of Rhodes, who I believe was a convert from Orthodoxy. I could be wrong about that.
Momentary distraction allowed the Catholic Constantine XI to retake Athens, but only a few years later, he would witness the end of the Eastern Roman Empire. Our mini-series on this.
And we're going to end today's stream by watching what was taken during the sack of Constantinople. But we got some things to get through first. So that was the first little section. That was the general overview of the crusade from the Orthodox perspective. So you can see it was one of tension. It was one of betrayal. It was one of 2 groups having totally different goals and objectives.
Betrayal, I've debunked that. And as for the Fourth Crusade, if they'd have just paid the Crusaders what they owed them, what two emperors had agreed to, things would have been fine and dandy.
The Crusades themselves in totally different ways. So let me now get into some more details for you guys as we move through, and we can return back to the First Crusades, because really the First Crusade is the most interesting crusade. And from the Western vantage point, it's the most successful crusade. It's the one that actually get Jerusalem, Antioch, exactly. And then subsequently some of the other.
Well, technically in the Sixth Crusade, the Crusaders get Jerusalem back, but that's another
cities in the Levant. So here's my study guide. This will be available up at the Logos Academy. Go to school.com/Logos Academy if anybody wants access to any of the study guides. Framing the problem, as I said, two civilizations within Christendom, but two very different worldviews. For the Latin West, they had a juridical theology, penitential warfare, and papal supremacy. This sort of defines the general characteristics of the Latins compared to the Greek.
It was a pilgrimage, indulgence for the pilgrimage.
East. Whereas in Constantinople, they had a sacramental healing. And this is tied with the penitential warfare.
Okay, this guy's not a theologian.
That in Orthodoxy, even these soldiers who fight for the empire and maybe they killed Turks or whoever in a just war, they still were pulled out of the Eucharistic offering and had to go through a period before they were able to take the Eucharist.
Now, I don't know about that, but I know that the Catholics, if you slayed someone in battle, you had to atone for it too. I mean, the whole idea of the indulgence was time out of purgatory.
It had to do with this sacramental healing of the soul.
So again, if you're on the like sacramental healing, well, okay, we use sacraments to heal us from sin too. So I don't know why
that the war is inevitable. It's part of our life from the Orthodox perspective, but it's not sacramental. What Pope Urban then does is basically add the Holy War as a sacrament for laity and creates the Crusader as a new office for lay people. It's a new occupation. You can become a Crusader for the first time. And so sacramental healing for the East, Symphonia, church, empire harmony, as opposed to what was going on in the West, and then suspicion toward.
Yeah, no, the Symphonia was a nightmare. And I think it was George Florovsky who basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, that the whole Orthodox Symphonia had been wrong from the start. Had been wrong. And it does go back into the first millennium too. Like, look, you got Constantine who hosted a ecumenical council. By the time you get to Justinian, he's kidnapping the Pope. He's putting him under house arrest. He's getting rid of replacing bishops left and right who don't agree with him. By the time you get to the 12th century, Symphonia, the emperor is like in charge of doctrine, like Emmanuel Comnenus.
Religious violence. Thus, Crusades exposed not just political conflict, but deep theological divergence already present after the Great Schism of 1054.
Not too deep.
Byzantine appeal to defensive war, not crusade. As I said, what started the whole First Crusade? Byzantine defeat at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. 1071, one of the most humiliating defeats in Byzantine history by the Seljuk Turks, leading and allowing the conquest of Anatolia by the Seljuk Turks. This is the state of the Byzantine Empire at this point. So Emperor Alexios Komnenos seeks Western mercenaries, not a mass religious movement. That's what he sends to Pope Urban II, talking about, why don't we come together as Christian brothers?
Well, we don't know because the letter doesn't exist.
And the restoration of Roman territory against the infidels, meaning the Muslims, and the Muslims growing as a military power. So the Byzantine intent is restore imperial territory, reinforce frontiers, maintain political sovereignty. Western transformation at the Council of Clermont, Pope Urban reframes this into penitential pilgrimage, a war with spiritual merit, indulgences. This was already a misalignment. The West spiritualized what Byzantium saw as a pragmatic military alliance. And here are the major timeline events. So, Battle of Manzikert, 1071. 1081, the rise of Alexios Komnenos, stabilizes empire, and then seeks Western military alliance. This leads to the First Crusade. From the Orthodox perspective, it begins hopeful. Even despite their differences, the cultural, the theological, the ethnic, the linguistic, it's hopeful. There's a hope in which they could actually come together for something better. And then they get the first fracture. So 1095, Council of Clermont, Pope Urban II calls the Crusade. Byzantine request becomes a mass religious movement. 1097, Nicaea becomes recaptured. This is where the hope is. Or the Orthodox Emperor Alexios says, okay, well, it's not easy. It's difficult to organize with the Latin Knights, but look what we just did. We're able
because he was helping them at that point. He hadn't gone back like he does later at Antioch.
to take back Nicaea. And that was returned back to Byzantium. Now, mind you, it's right next to Constantinople, so it makes sense why they would do that. And this was seen as, this must be the pattern that the Crusade's going to go down. Well, wait until 1098. Antioch is seized by the Crusaders. And honestly, you should watch it all against all odds. I mean, they're right on the brink of just giving up because they've been there for so many months.
And then Alexius, he didn't reinforce them because he thought they were finished. Then they, quote unquote, betray the Byzantine trust.
And Bohemond of Toronto refuses to return the city. The same Norman that 15 years previously was attacking the southwestern part of the Byzantine Empire. And this is the first turning point. You have this, I have the little siren emoji I found. First turning point, meaning the first clear betrayal of Byzantine trust. 1099, Jerusalem is captured. Crusaders establish the Latin kingdom. Success for the West, but outside Byzantine control. Then you have the Second Crusade. And this is just total disillusionment because it accomplishes nothing. Second Crusade, Western kings march east from France. And
you had Conrad, the Holy Roman Empire, and King Louis VII of France.
Germany. They failed disastrously.
King Louis VII was more successful. He won some victories against the Turks, got down to the Holy Land, but then
in Anatolia.
They do some stupid.
For 1148, the failed siege of Damascus, turning point, meaning Western armies equal disorganized and ineffective from the Byzantine perspective, and the distrust of the Crusaders deepens.
Well, okay, the reason they tapped Damascus, and this was so stupid, the whole idea of the crusade was to get the county of Hesse back, which was one of the early Crusader states, that Zengi had captured and massacred the population. Zengi is the leader of the Muslims. So Zengi, then you have Damascus, which is controlled by a group of Muslims who are allied with the Crusaders, at least on paper. But there's fear from the Crusaders that Zengi is going to take Damascus. So the Crusaders get the idea to attack Damascus, even though it's their ally, and take the city because, or else Zengi's going to take it. And so they attack the city. They weaken the city, but they don't take it. Then Zengi sends his troops, goes and routs them. And then eventually Zengi takes Damascus because they were weakened by the Crusaders. It was an absolute nightmare.
Then you have the Third Crusade, where essentially the rift between the West and the East is...
Saladin never defeated the Crusaders in the Third Crusade. They lost at Acre. They lost at Jaffa. They they lost at Arsuf. In fact, he held on to Jerusalem. But basically, Richard was able to restore the entire coast.
Fairly explicit. The famous Battle of Hattin. Saladin defeats the Crusaders.
That's not part of the Third Crusade. Battle of Hattin is before the Third Crusade. Hattin and Jerusalem lost, then the Crusade was
Jerusalem
called.
is lost, despite the Battle of Jaffa and others.
And after that, the only thing they had was the city of Tyre.
Were Lionheart is able to defeat Saladin, but he's never able to reconquer Jerusalem. Once Saladin takes Jerusalem, it's never attained again.
No, they got it back in the Sixth Crusade for 15
except for
years.
this brief little period where there's like
Yeah.
we'll get into it. There's a brief little negotiation, but it doesn't go anywhere. So collapse of Crusader strength after the Third Crusade. Richard of England, he wins some victories. Jerusalem isn't taken. It basically becomes a Western geopolitical project because they have Tyre, Acre, Antioch. They have these coastal cities. Byzantium increasingly is irrelevant in regard to the activities and objectives in the Levant. And then the Fourth Crusade, the ultimate betrayal, is 1202 to 1203, is the diversion of the Crusades. The Venetian influence and redirects the entire
Fourth Why
Crusade
they redirect it?
Why they Constantinople.
Why,
Crusaders attack, churches desecrated, relics looted, Latin Empire established, ultimate betrayal of orthodoxy.
Where's the context, Dr. Harry? You have a PhD. I mean, if your dissertation was on the Fourth Crusade, I guarantee it wasn't on the Fourth Crusade, because you would have got laughed out of this whole thing. I mean, no, there's a whole context. If Alexius IV and Isaac II had just kept their promise, paid the Crusaders what they owed them, joined the crusade, tried harder to unite the church, and established a garrison of knights, it all would have been fine. They could have done that, but they didn't. They went back on their word, which you conveniently see. The thing is, like, okay, say I go up to someone. I'm Alan. I go up and punch a guy named Ross. I punch Ross in the face. And then Ross comes and punches me in the face. And then an hour later, like, I got a black eye from Ross. I go and someone goes, "What happened, Alan?" It's like, well, this guy named Ross punched me. What a piece of garbage, right? Look what he did. Well, I'm leaving out half the story. He did this with the First Crusade, Dr. Harry did. He's doing this with the Fourth Crusade.
Final rupture between East and West, fully submitted.
No, 1054 was the final. Well, if you want to be true, the final rupture was after Florence.
That's why there is no unification after that.
Well,
and so the aftermath, the Byzantine recapture Constantinople in 1261, 57 years. The Latin Crusaders control Constantinople, forcing the Byzantines to live in Nicaea, essentially.
No, most of the Byzantines in the city still live there. They still live there.
And this meant political recovery, but spiritual and civilizational damage remains. And basically, the empire just wanes and gets smaller and smaller from that point.
Yeah, but 1261, it's still a huge empire. They still have 30% of Anatolia, or a huge chunk of Anatolia. And then it starts to go, because now the Turks start to get organized into one faction, the Ottomans. And they keep absorbing the smaller Turkish states, and then, yeah.
Forward.
And as I mentioned, the Grand Catalan Company.
So, I'm just gonna look at the First Crusade here, because that's what we're gonna get into. Is the First Crusade 1096 to 1099, broadly successful in Western terms. The Western objectives is to liberate Jerusalem, aid Eastern Christians, and gain remission of sins, penitential warfare. The Byzantine sole purpose is to recover lost Anatolian territories and use Crusaders as mercenary support due to the lack of soldiers they have. Key moments: People's Crusade destroyed before reaching Asia Minor. I'll show you that. That's Peter the Hermit and all the women, children, elderly. He took right into the heart of the Seljuk Turks.
I don't think he was with them. I'm pretty sure he was still in Constantinople, because he wasn't killed or sold into slavery, because everyone was either killed or sold into slavery at that
And then
point.
you have Crusaders swear oath to Alexios, but then betray him after the siege of Antioch, and then they capture Jerusalem 1099.
I've refuted that.
Success, establishment of Crusader states, Jerusalem, Antioch, Edessa.
And eventually the county of Tripoli too. So there's actually 4. And the fall of Edessa is actually what causes the Second Crusade to be called.
Temporary weakening of Muslim powers, the failures. Crusaders failed to return Byzantine lands, and then deepening mistrust between Latins and Greeks. From the Byzantine view, initially hopeful, ultimately disillusioned, saw Crusaders.
What about the huge chunk of Anatolia you got back?
As undisciplined oath breakers, and beginning a pattern where Western aid becomes Western encroachment. So that's the First Crusade. And
so, I mean, if they were so betrayed, why was the emperor working with Conrad on the Second Crusade then?
I have a handful of myths, Western, myths about, I have 5 major myths about the Crusades that from the Orthodox perspective just don't jive. I'll get into those here in just a few, but I want to return now to the First Crusade and add some context to the Orthodox perspective that we were just highlighting in the document. So let's flip over to the First Crusade here. And this is almost a 6-hour documentary on kings and generals. If you want to see the whole kit and caboodle of the First Crusade, check this one out. It has incredible details. It's an incredible overview. We are obviously not watching 6 hours of documentary.
Or you can read the primary sources.
So I'm going to move through here. This whole section's about the Battle of Manzikert, why that was so devastating for Byzantium. And then you have the rise of Alexios Komnenos, and talking about how he was able to achieve victory and basically how he becomes the emperor of Byzantium. So we're going to begin here with Pope Urban calling for
was to the east.
Pope Urban calling for the Crusade. So we're aware of everything that happened. The Eastern Empire is needing mercenaries, and so he sends the letter to Pope Urban, and this is what unfolds afterwards.
So far, we have covered the First Crusade of Alexios Komnenos' reign as he usurped the throne of a bankrupted and exhausted Eastern Roman Empire in 1081. He fought off the Normans and Pechenegs and restored imperial authority while maintaining the balance between the powerful noble families, clergy, and commoners. And yet, the biggest issue on the agenda was left unaddressed. The now firmly established Sultanate of Rum, which began as a branch of the Seljuk Empire, was no longer a vassal of the Byzantines. A year after his victory at the Battle of Livonian, Alexios launched several ambitious social and monetary reforms and crowned his son John as heir, before assembling an army to reconquer Anatolia. But before he could depart, news of a Serbian uprising reached the capital, and the emperor knew that he could not campaign in the east while the west was in open rebellion, so he set out towards Dyrrhachium. As the army moved across the Via Egnatia in 1093, Nikephoros Iachenes, the son of Romanos IV, was caught with a concealed dagger. After being tortured, the co-conspirators were revealed, and to the emperor's surprise, the list included the former empress Maria and his own brother Adrianos, who plotted to kill him. Alexios came to the realization that the empire was not stable enough to afford a large-scale, lengthy campaign against the Seljuks, and that with every idle moment, it was slipping back to the disasters he fought so desperately to avoid. Luckily, he was meticulously working on another plan. After witnessing the military prowess of the Norman knights firsthand, Alexios appealed to the courts of the West, hoping to inspire an armed pilgrimage which would reconquer the Roman land.
See, an armed pilgrimage, not a holy war. It's a pilgrimage.
And for more than just gold. Agents spread the stories of how the Turks extorted and killed innocent pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem, how the Muslims destroyed holy sites and turned ancient churches into mosques or stables, how Christian men and women were enslaved and violated. Along with these,
you can read about this in the 5 primary accounts. Just type it into Google. You'll find
generous donations of not just coins, but precious artifacts, even pieces of the true cross, giving a taste of what was to come if a group of knights would take up this colossal task and act as a new kind of mercenary force. the Seljuk treatment of the many pilgrims who made their way towards Jerusalem was exaggerated, but not untrue. In contrast to the sedentary Islamic population, the nomads didn't strictly follow the Islamic laws of war and were known for their brutal punishments and executions. The Seljuk realm was decentralized, and rogue chieftains often enacted their own justice. More importantly, Jerusalem, as well as the entire Seljuk Empire, was in a period of turmoil caused by a succession crisis,
and they split into two.
with at least 4 pretenders and many other governors fighting each other. The majority of Christian Europe was illiterate and obsessed with holy relics. There were numerous sites that people believed to be sacred, and groups of people were displaying the bones of supposed saints for a few coins. And yet the most holy of sites was that of Jerusalem and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, from which pilgrims would bring back scrapings of rock or dirt as proof of their journey. That very church was destroyed by the Fatimid Caliph in 1009 and rebuilt in 1048 with Byzantine resources.
A 10,000. I do have a primary source that talks about that, and it said the caliph who did that, the Fatimid Caliph, was doing it in retaliation for something, but he never says what he was retaliating to. So, I don't know. I'm about to read some Armenian chronicles. That might give me
took
some.
hold of the populace, who thought the Seljuks would do the same. In fact, many believed that Jesus would return around this time to the place of his birth. Natural occurrences such
See, pause for a second. You see in Anatolia the Sultanate of Rum, and over further here you see the Seljuk Empire. So at the Battle of Derilium and Nicaea, they're fighting the Turk Sultanate of Rum. When they get to Antioch, they're fighting the main Seljuk Empire.
as meteor showers and earthquakes at the time only deepened the fears and hopes of the Christian world. For centuries, the main opposition to Islam came from the borders with that world: Iberia, Sicily, South Italy, and Byzantium.
As far as I know, he's an actual doctor. He's not like Jamila Muhammad White.
But a new movement was starting to develop within Lorraine, Burgundy, and France, one which called for a completely new type of war, a holy war. Pope Urban II himself cited the Book of
Give me
Daniel,
the source on
stating
that.
that God had indeed changed the times and offered a new remedy for human sin. The pagans to the north were gone. The Reconquista was yet another source of fear and hope. And
His, I think Alexander II, not his direct predecessor, but Pope from in the 1060s until 1073, he did a lot of things with the Reconquista, and there were like indulgences involved
the nobles
there.
were obsessed with the idea of a just war. The lords who dominated
Well, just war has come all the way back from
the
Augustine.
fractured monarchies grew rich and numerous with the technological and agricultural innovations of the 11th century. And by now, most houses adopted primogeniture, which meant that the older sons inherited the domain, leaving younger sons without a purpose, often turning against each other despite the outcries of the church. Pilgrimage was one of the best ways for the Latins to repent for their sins, whether it was to Santiago de Compostela, Rome, or Jerusalem, as long as they could afford it. They knew the road and how to fight, but lacked a common goal and leader. Until this period, the papacy had little more than nominal power, but the energetic pontificates of Leo IX, Nicholas II, Alexander II, and especially Gregory VII led the papal
Alexander II, that's who I talked
states
about.
to vie for power and authority over the entire Catholic world. Leo IX personally led an army in 1053.
Well, a lot can be said about that. I could talk for hours about the investiture controversy.
As seen in our series on the Normans in Italy. In 1063, Alexander II sent a papal banner and an indulgence for those who fell in battle against the Muslims to the army
See? Urban II wasn't the first to use indulgence.
preparing for the siege of Barbastro in Spain, and another one to William of Normandy as he was preparing his conquest of England. In 1073, Gregory
Those were the Normans, by the way,
the
same
Seventh
ones.
proposed to lead an army to aid Constantinople, and now Urban II, who had just
Yeah, Gregory II did say that in December 7th, 1074. Why do I have that memorized? because I just read that letter the other day.
gained the papal seat from the anti.
Again, I think I quoted that in a Substack article. Follow me on Substack, guys. If you're not subscribing to me on Substack, that's where my best stuff is now. I'm still on YouTube. I'm still on X. But Substack, you need to go there. That's the mate of it. So go to Alan Rule on Substack and subscribe. If you become a paid subscriber, I got excellent stuff behind the paywall. Stuff I recently have one where I just roast the Greek schismatics. That's behind the paywall, though. So
Pope in 1093, the year the plot to kill Alexius.
In fact, if you want, send me a DM on X or on some social media, and I'll help you out.
Was thwarted, was preparing to outdo them all. Pope Urban II was elected in 1088 and was one of the most prominent supporters of the Gregorian reforms, which outlined the superiority of the church over the secular rulers.
Yes.
Initially,
yes.
he was isolated from Rome due to his clash with the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV, but he was energetic, well-spoken, and extremely charismatic, touring Norman Italy, gathering support everywhere he went. Determined to gain the pontificate, he even reached out to the Eastern Roman Empire, extending the friendly correspondence with Alexios, which was established by the former Pope Victor III. Even after being recognized as the Bishop of Rome in 1093, he continued his frantic expeditions across Christendom and assembled the Council of Piacenza in March of 1095, which was centered around church reform, the anti-pope, heresy, and the issue of the French king.
Yeah, the anti-pope was Clement III, who was a pawn of Henry IV. He never really had much support. In fact, if you read the Alexiad by Anna Komnene, she recognizes Gregory VII as the legit pope when he's talking about that era. And she didn't like Gregory VII, but she admitted he was a bishop of Rome.
First, who married Bertrade of Montfort, despite the fact that they both had spouses of their own, for which he was excommunicated.
So we're going to skip forward. This is going to be, again, it talks more about Pope Urban. We're focusing on the Byzantine perspective. So then Pope Urban begins the call. They first responded with the People's Crusade, but then the princes begin to join the party. And so we're going to skip forward here to the Prince's Crusade. If you want to learn more about the People's Crusade, go ahead. It has to do with Peter the Hermit and all these regular people he was going to take on this pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and they all get annihilated. So we're going to focus on the next portion here. This is the Prince's Crusade. So here are the actual princes of Western Europe being called up for the crusade.
The so-called Peasant Crusade, led by Peter the Hermit, left a bitter taste in Emperor Alexios' mouth, but he was still determined to carry out his plan. Dyrrhachium was designated as the rendezvous point, where Byzantine officials and interpreters, along with large stockpiles of provisions and gifts, awaited the army, probably the largest since the days of the United Roman Empire. To quote the chronicler and participant of the Prince's Crusade, Fulcher of Chartres, whoever heard of such a mix?
I got that primary source somewhere around here. I love that primary source. It's a great source.
Languages in one army. There were Franks, Flemings, Frisians, Gauls, Allobroges, Lotharingians, Alemanni, Bavarians, Normans, English, Scots, Aquitanians, Italians, Dacians, Apulians, Iberians, Bretons, Greeks, and Armenians. If any Breton or Teuton wished to question me, I could neither reply nor understand. The earliest group was that of Hugh, Count of Vermandois, brother of the excommunicated French king, and one of the two actual princes in this.
I believe that the excommunicated king was King Philip the First. I'm not gonna. And King Philip First. I think that was him.
Prince's Crusade.
Yes, it was.
In February 1096, he led a council in Paris discussing the logistics and goals of the expedition, which he intended to lead. Coincidentally, a lunar eclipse occurred during the negotiations, and thousands of Parisians observed as the moon became blood red. During the next several months, commoners and nobles alike sold off their possessions as they needed the currency to buy provisions along the way. which led to a rare case of mass deflation due to the shortage of hard coinage.
Yeah, no, see, that's the thing. A lot of people think the Crusades were to go and acquire wealth. No, if you wanted to acquire wealth in medieval Europe, you attacked the kingdom next to you. It took 3 to 6 annual incomes to go on a crusade. So if you make $100,000 a year, it's 3 to 600,000 to go on a crusade. That's how much it costs. And a lot of people like bankrupted themselves.
The group headed out towards Constantinople at the agreed-upon date of August 15th, and along the way was joined by the remnants of Count Emico's force, most of whom were knights.
Count Emico of Leiningen was the guy who he's the one who attacked the Jews in the Rhineland and who was talking about very negatively in the Chronicles, and he never went on crusade. And it talks about how his remnants joined up with the main body.
Upon reaching Bari in October, Hugh sent a few envoys to Dyrrhachium with the words, "Be it known to you, Duke, that our Lord Hugh is almost here. He brings with him from Rome the golden standard of St. Peter. Understand, moreover, that he is the supreme commander of the Frankish army. See to it, then, that he is accorded a reception worthy of his rank, and yourself prepare to meet him." Unfortunately for Hugh, however, another natural disaster intervened, as most of his fleet was sunk during the treacherous crossing of the Adriatic. The prince himself was found on the coast near Dyrrhachium, shipwrecked and without the majority of his army and supplies. The remnants were greeted warmly, outfitted and fed, before being escorted to Alexios by Admiral Manuel Vutamitis. The second group was led by Godfrey of Bouillon, Duke of Lorraine, who spent the last 20 years of his life fighting for the Holy Roman Emperor against the papacy.
And we're going to be talking about some of these figures here right after this. So before we get into the siege of Antioch, Godfrey is actually one of the better crusaders. I would say Raymond of Toulouse is probably the best from the Byzantine perspective. He was one of the rational voices that wanted to give the territory back to the Byzantines and uphold his oath. He felt conflicted, and his conscience plagued him for the fact that they were essentially betraying Alexios despite everything that he gave them for their crusading mission. And Godfrey, he was a pretty pious guy, honest guy. Again, does his interest align with Alexios or the Byzantine Empire? Absolutely not. But out of all the figures, I would say Raymond of Toulouse and then Godfrey of Bouillon is probably the two figures that we could say those were pretty quality men. Maybe we don't agree with what their objective was, but they were at least honest people.
And defending his own lands from a coalition of claimants. Despite tracing his ancestry to Charlemagne himself, his titles were not hereditary, which meant that his position was very unstable. So when the preachings of Urban and Peter reached him, Godfrey answered the call with great enthusiasm. He sold off most of his estates, mortgaged his great castle of Bouillon.
See, it was expensive to go on a crusade.
To the Bishop of Liege, and extorted many Jewish citizens in order to equip a formidable army, which included his brother Baldwin and many knights and nobles. In order to avoid the papacy, his second army decided to pass the same land.
That is the Baldwin who will become the king of Jerusalem. So his brother Baldwin is Baldwin the First of Jerusalem.
Oh, by the way, Raymond of Toulouse, who we just brought up, his later successors, like I think Raymond the Sixth, so like 150 years later, would be the ones who would bend the knee to the Albigensian heresy, or at least protect the Albigensians. So the crusade was against people like him, not him, but Raymond the Sixth, way down the road. That's in the 1220s, though, or 12, a long time ago.
Taken by the People's Crusade via Hungary. In early October, King Coloman was given Godfrey's brother as hostage in case the Crusaders decided to raid the countryside, and convinced him to grant the Crusaders passage after he pledged that there would be no raiding. There were no accidents along the way, thanks to the high discipline and warning that anyone who defied Godfrey would be killed. And by November, he was reunited with his brother and entered the sacked city of Belgrade. By the time they reached Nish, the Crusaders met up with their Byzantine escorts,
That's where
who
Constantine
guaranteed
is
that
from.
the army would be well
Nish.
fed along the way, with each city generously.
I've actually driven through Nish. I've not ever been to I didn't see. I've been to Belgrade. But I went through Nish on my way to Kosovo.
I didn't know if anybody else picked that one up. It gets even worse in the Second Crusade. But yeah, Godfrey, he needed money, so he just raided Jewish savings.
Handing out grain, wine, oil, and meat. Some of the nobles were so impressed by this warm welcome that they raced to Constantinople, hoping to get more gifts, at which point they heard a rumor that the French prince was imprisoned. On December 12th, Godfrey halted at Salimbria, and what had until this point been an unprecedented peaceful movement turned to raiding and looting of the countryside after the demand to release Hugh was rejected.
Okay, there's a thing. There was one of the Crusaders, I believe, attacks a mosque in Constantinople because the anti-Muslim sentiment was through the roof. You know, they're getting ready to cross into Muslim territory. And so I believe some overzealous ones attacked a mosque in Constantinople because there were mosques there prior to the Turks conquering it. And that gets him in a lot of trouble. I don't know if they'll mention this. I don't remember all the details of this. Keep in mind, I've read so many chronicles.
Sent 2 Franks in his service to calm things down, and by December 23rd, the army made camp outside Constantinople along the Golden Horn, where Hugh awaited Godfrey to assure him that the rumor was false. The Lotharingians were puzzled and further infuriated as some survivors of the Battle of Civitot blamed Alexios for the disaster, and as a result, Godfrey refused his invitation to meet the emperor personally. Alexios responded by closing his markets to the Crusaders, and hostilities were resumed. Demands, insults, scare tactics, and a short-lived Christmas truce ensued, before Alexios sent several ships filled with Pecheneg archers to harass the Frankish camp, while Godfrey marched towards Constantinople, aiming to assault it. His brother Baldwin led 500 soldiers, who attempted to set the city gate on fire. Both sides sustained heavy casualties, but eventually the attack was repulsed. After 6 more days of plundering the countryside, the Crusaders were shocked when an imperial envoy arrived and announced that Alexios was ready to make peace and deliver his own son and heir, John, as a hostage. With this guarantee, Godfrey entered the city with a small entourage, where instead of a vengeful enemy, he met a generous host. "I have heard about you," Alexios told him, "that you are a very powerful knight and prince in your land, and a very wise man and completely honest. Because of this, I am taking you as my adopted son, and I am putting everything I possess in your power, so that my empire and land can be freed and saved through you from the present and future multitudes." In return for numerous gifts, Godfrey swore an oath that he would not harm imperial subjects and return any land taken conquered from the Turks to Alexios. Some sources misunderstand this oath as one of vassalage, but this was a masterful use of a familiar custom for a completely different purpose. Mercenaries in the service of Byzantium were forced to make a similar oath, but were given titles and land in return. In this case, Alexios became the supreme commander of the expedition, offering gifts instead of land. When he returned to his camp, Godfrey ordered his men to keep the peace and began boarding Byzantine ships, who transported him across the Bosphorus along with Hugh and Peter the Hermit. The third Crusader force was that of Bohemond, who had been disinherited by his father, Robert Guiscard, in favor of his younger half-brother, Roger Borsa, leaving Bohemond with just Taranto and Bari.
And Bohemond, this gentleman right here, he is the one who's going to claim ownership of Antioch. He is the one that is the most explicit betrayer of Alexios.
I've refuted this like 3
he is
times.
the one 15 years earlier who is ransacking that coastal area there of the Eastern Roman Empire. So this is a gentleman who, again, do we support Godfrey per se? No. But he was more honest than Bohemond. Bohemond was not a good guy. He was all about, again, he was dispossessed of some of his heritage by his father.
And the thing is, I don't know if he's going to get into this, but he actually goes to war with the Byzantine Empire in like 1108 or something like that. And he loses and he becomes a vassal. And ironically, if you watch, what was it? If you read the Alexiad by Anna Komnena, she talks about that, and she puts the whole text of the oath he has to swear, and it's so humiliating to become the vassal
So
of
his
the
whole thing was about gaining wealth, fame, and status. That's why he's on the crusade.
In 1096, he was helping his uncle lay siege to Amalfi when he heard that a massive army was making its way to the Holy Land with crosses on their shoulders. With little to lose, Bohemond prepared to invade Byzantium once more and tore off his expensive garment and had it cut into crosses for his men. Many warriors stepped forward under the pretext of this religious movement, and 500 knights, along with many footmen, abandoned the siege to travel east. The experienced commander ordered that his men land at multiple points across the Adriatic coastline before meeting up in the city of Valona on November 1st. They were instructed to not plunder the countryside and claim only as much food as they needed. But as they arrived at their former base of operations in Castoria, the garrison refused to share their supplies, which led to another series of widespread looting, during which an entire community of Paulicians was eradicated at Pelagonia. As the army reached the Via Egnatia, they were met by a group of Pecheneg mounted archers, who harassed them with the tried and tested nomadic tactics. The Crusaders prevailed, and several Pechenegs were captured, but as soon as Bohemond found out they were carrying out imperial orders, he let them go. Eventually, a high official met with the Normans, who smoothed things over and provided them with supplies. At the same time, Bohemond attempted to make contact with Godfrey and offered a joint attack against the Empire, but his message arrived just as he was making peace with Alexios. Bohemond had some of the best soldiers in the world, but his contingent was small, so he decided to enter Constantinople as a friend. Upon meeting his old rival, Alexios once again showed him the best hospitality he could hope for. During a feast, Bohemond was offered both cooked and raw meat in case he feared it was poisoned. The Norman decided to pick the latter and prepared the meal himself. Later, he began negotiating with Alexios in his native Greek language and suggested that he should become Domestikos of the East, or chief commander of the eastern lands. The request was denied, and instead, he was promised ownership of any lands east of Antioch, as well as being designated as an imperial agent. After agreeing and swearing the same oath as other crusaders,
she totally had a
Bohemond
thing
returned
for
to
it.
his quarters, which were filled with precious objects, coins, and silk. Not everyone in Bohemond's army was happy about this. His nephew, Tancred, had no intentions to play sophisticated mind games, and instead crossed the Bosphorus with the bulk of the Norman forces. That same day, the third and by far the largest Crusader army, making up half of the total force, arrived at Constantinople. Raymond IV, Count of Toulouse, was extremely rich and more powerful than the French king himself, having recently inherited Provence. By his marriage with Elvira of Aragon, he was connected with the royal houses of Iberia and fought several wars there. He was the only crusade leader who personally discussed the project with Pope Urban and was fully committed to it. He brought his wife and heir, as well as several noblemen from southern France. But his most influential follower was the spiritual leader and first Crusader bishop, Adhemar of Le Puy.
It is this Raymond of Toulouse that I said is probably the most honorable figure of the First Crusade, especially from the Orthodox perspective. He was a trustworthy person. Now, as I said, these are Catholics. They have a totally different objective. They have a totally different perspective of
It's not totally different.
what their purpose is there. They view their alliance with Byzantium as a sort of temporary thing because their goal is, as will become, to establish their own papal states, if you will. At least
they're not papal states. They're Crusader states. The Pope's not in charge of them.
Their own chieftains that are the Pope himself is ultimately the sole authority.
No, he's not. He's not the political authority over the papal states. All right. we're at 1 hour and 30 minutes. I'll tell you what, we're gonna stop this here. Yeah, we will get back to this. So, guys, subscribe to my Substack. Subscribe, become a free subscriber, or if you're generous, a paid subscriber. There's good content behind the paywalls, stuff that can refute people like Dr. Harry. Yeah, Dr. Harry, if you want to collab, this is my niche. I'm the medieval guy. I'd be happy to if you even want me to come on your channel, I'd be happy to oblige. All right. Yeah, but I will be responding to the rest of this video. And yeah, subscribe to my Substack. I say that. It's just Alan Rule. You can find me on there easily. All right. I wish everyone a good day. I haven't eaten yet. It's 4:16 p.m. here, and I haven't eaten yet all day. So I better eat. All right. Bye.